Chapter 6. The betrayal came at dawn. Kira woke to the sound of growls and snarling voices echoing through the corridors of Zane's compound, a sprawling estate hidden in the mountains outside the city where his pack made their home. She'd been staying there for 3 days since the confrontation with Cassius, trying to come to terms with the blood on her hands and the dark power that still whispered seductively in her mind. But these weren't the usual sounds of wolves establishing dominance or settling disputes. These were the sounds of rebellion. She slipped from the bed she'd been sharing with Zane, noting that his side was already cold. He'd been up early again, dealing with the fallout from the foundry incident. Word had spread through the supernatural community faster than wildfire. The last shadow moon had awakened, and she'd killed 3 wolves with her bare hands. Some packs wanted to ally with them. Others wanted to eliminate the threat before it grew stronger. And apparently, some of Zane's own wolves had made their choice. Kira dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, her enhanced senses picking up the sense of too many wolves in the main hall below. The compound usually housed 12 pack members, but she counted at least 20 different scents, which meant outsiders had been brought in. She made her way downstairs, staying in the shadows as voices grew clearer. Cannot continue to protect her. The voice belonged to Raven Blackwood, Zane's lieutenant and second-in-command. The massive wolf who'd seemed so loyal just days ago now sounded furious and desperate. She's a liability, Alpha. A weapon that will bring destruction down on all of us. She's my mate. Zane's voice was dangerously quiet, but Kira could hear the tension thrumming beneath his control. And she saved your life at the foundry. By killing 3 wolves like they were nothing. Another voice, Soren, one of the younger pack members. She's not one of us. She's something else, something wrong. She's Shadow Moon, said a female voice Kira didn't recognize. My grandmother told stories about them. They were tyrants who enslaved other packs, forced wolves to serve them through blood magic and fear. Enough. Zane's command cracked like a whip through the air. Kira is under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can challenge me according to pack law or leave. Those are your options. Maybe there's a third option. Raven's voice had changed, become cold and calculating. Kira crept closer to the top of the stairs, peering down into the main hall through the wooden balusters. 20 wolves stood in a loose circle around Zane, who faced his lieutenant with the kind of stillness that preceded violence. But something was wrong with the positioning. Instead of the chaotic arrangement of an impromptu confrontation, the wolves were strategically placed to block exits. This wasn't a heated argument that had gotten out of hand. This was planned. What kind of third option? Zane asked, his golden eyes narrowing. Raven smiled, and there was no warmth in the expression. The kind where we put the pack's survival above one female's feelings. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Kira watched in horror as wolves she'd shared meals with, laughed with, trusted with her safety, lunged at the man she loved. Zane shifted mid-motion, his human form dissolving into the massive black wolf she'd seen in her dreams, but even his alpha strength couldn't overcome 20 opponents. But Raven has his orders. Once Victor arrives, your mate will suffer a tragic accident during the challenge fight. Challenge fight? Oh, didn't you know? Frost's smile was razor-sharp. Raven is challenging Zane for leadership of the pack. It's perfectly legal under werewolf law. If the alpha falls in combat, the challenger takes control. Of course, most alphas don't go into such fights already weakened by battle and... He held up a small vial filled with dark liquid. Wolfsbane, Kira whispered. The concentrated variety. Just a few drops in a wound, and even an alpha becomes as weak as a newborn pup. Ember took the vial and tucked it into his jacket. Victor wants Zane alive long enough to watch you submit to a new master. Then they'll both die, and Victor will claim this territory along with his prize. White-hot rage flooded Kira's system, so intense it made the silver burns feel like gentle warmth in comparison. The power she discovered at the foundry stirred beneath her skin, pushing against the constraints of the silver cage like a caged animal testing its bonds. You made a mistake, she said quietly. Did we? Frost leaned back in his chair. You're trapped in a cage specifically designed to hold shadow moon wolves. Your mate is about to be poisoned and killed. Victor will be here within the hour to claim you. What mistake did we make? Kira met his pale eyes steadily. You assumed the cage would hold me. Above them, she heard new sounds, the rhythmic clash of claws against claws, the distinctive snarls of an alpha challenge. Raven had made his move. But there were other sounds too. Sounds that made her heart sink. Zane's pained whimper as something, probably the wolfsbane, hit his system. The triumphant howl of a challenger sensing victory. The encouraging growls of pack members who'd chosen their side. The man she loved was dying, and she was trapped like an animal. The rage building inside her found a new target, not just Cassius and his wolves, but the silver cage itself. Every bar, every lock, every molecule of the metal that dared to contain her while Zane suffered. Kira. Zane's voice drifted down from above, weaker than she'd ever heard it. I'm sorry. I should have protected you better. Save your strength, Alpha, Raven's voice carried clearly through the compound. You'll need it for what comes next. The sound of claws raking across flesh. Zane's sharp intake of breath. That was when something inside Kira snapped. The power that had been whispering seductively in her mind since the foundry suddenly roared to life with the force of a hurricane. It poured through her veins like molten gold, seeking an outlet, demanding release. The silver cage that had been designed to contain Shadow Moon wolves had been built to restrain the previous generation, wolves who'd hidden their nature, who'd tried to live as humans, who'd never fully embraced what they were. It had never been tested against a Shadow Moon in full fury. Kira rose to her feet, and the silver that had been burning her skin now felt merely warm. The mesh that had been dampening her abilities was suddenly as permeable as air. That's impossible, Ember breathed, rising from his chair. The silver should. Kira grabbed the nearest bar and crushed it in her bare hand. The metal crumpled like paper, the sound echoing through the stone chamber like a gunshot. Both wolves scrambled backward, their pale faces going white with terror. The silver, Frost stammered, it should be burning you. It is. Kira's voice carried harmonics that made the stone walls vibrate. I just don't care anymore. She pulled the cage apart with her bare hands, silver mesh tearing like gossamer. The locks didn't just break, they disintegrated under the force of her grip. Within seconds, she stood free in the center of the ruined cage, power crackling around her like visible electricity. Frost lunged at her with supernatural speed, claws extended. Kira caught him by the throat and lifted him off his feet with one hand. The casual display of strength made Ember whimper and press himself against the far wall. Where is Cassius? She asked conversationally. He's not. Frost choked out. Kira's fingers tightened slightly. Wrong answer. Approaching from the north. Ember shouted. He'll be here in 20 minutes with a full strike force. Thank you. Kira snapped Frost's neck with a quick twist of her wrist, then turned to Ember with a smile that held no warmth. You can go. What? Run. Tell your master that I'm coming for him. Tell him what you saw here. Tell him that cage and silver and poison won't save him when I find him. Ember didn't need to be told twice. He fled through the door, his footsteps echoing as he raced for the compound's exit. Kira followed more slowly, the power still coursing through her system like a drug. She could hear everything happening above, Zane's labored breathing, Raven's confident taunts, the excited murmurs of pack members who thought they were watching their alpha's final moments. The stairs leading up from the dungeon were carved stone, each step worn smooth by decades of use. Kira climbed them with deliberate care, feeling the ancient stones crack slightly under each footfall. She reached the main level to find the hall transformed into an arena. Furniture had been pushed aside to create a fighting circle, and pack members ringed the space, their eyes fixed on the two wolves grappling in the center. Zane, even weakened by poison, was still magnificent. His black fur was matted with blood, and his movements had lost some of their fluid grace, but he fought with the desperate fury of an alpha protecting his mate. Raven was larger, fresher, and uninjured. Worse, he fought with the confidence of someone who knew the outcome was predetermined. Every few moments, his claws would rake across Zane's flanks, and the wounds would take longer to heal than they should. The wolfsbane was doing its work. "You were a good alpha once," Raven said, his words carrying clearly in his half-shifted form. "But she made you weak. Made you choose her over the pack." Zane's response was a snarl that spoke of pain and defiance. "When this is over," Raven continued, circling like a shark scenting blood, "I'll make her death quick. It's more mercy than she deserves, but I'm not a monster. You won't touch her." The words came from the doorway, and every head in the room turned toward Kira. She stood silhouetted in the entrance, power radiating from her in waves that made the air itself seem to shimmer. Her clothes were singed from the silver, her skin marked with burns that were already healing, but her eyes blazed with golden fire that put Zane's to shame. "Impossible," someone whispered. "She was in the silver cage. The cage is gone." Kira's voice carried to every corner of the room, rich with harmonics that spoke directly to the wolf in each listener. "Just like everyone who tries to hurt what's mine." Raven backed away from Zane, his confidence evaporating. "You're too late. The challenge is almost over." "No." Kira stepped into the circle, and several pack members involuntarily retreated. "It's just beginning." The transformation hit her like a tidal wave. But this wasn't the controlled shift she'd seen other wolves manage. This was something primal and devastating, power given form and fury. Her human shape dissolved, but what emerged wasn't quite wolf and wasn't quite human. It was something in between, something that had never existed before. She stood 7 feet tall, her body a perfect hybrid of human intelligence and lupin predator. Silver fur-covered muscle and sinew that rippled with barely contained power, and her eyes burned like twin suns. "Dear God," someone breathed. "What is she?" "Evolution," Kira said, her voice now a sound that made the walls tremble. "I'm what happens when you push a shadow moon too far." Raven shifted to full wolf form and lunged at her, desperation overriding his fear. Kira caught him in midair and slammed him into the nearest wall with enough force to crack the stone. The impact sent a shockwave through the building that shattered every window on the ground floor. The other wolves scattered, some fleeing for the exits while others pressed themselves against the walls in submission. The raw power radiating from Kira's hybrid form was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It spoke to the deepest, most primal part of their nature and commanded absolute obedience. Raven struggled to his feet, blood streaming from his muzzle. "The pack will never accept you as alpha." Kira's clawed hand closed around his throat, lifting him off the ground. "I'm not asking for acceptance." She squeezed, and the sound of crushing cartilage echoed through the suddenly silent hall. But as Raven's body went limp in her grasp, she became aware of other sounds. Approaching vehicles, the scent of more wolves, the metallic tang of weapons being prepared. Cassius had arrived with his strike force. And apparently, he'd brought friends. Through the shattered windows, she could see lights moving through the forest, dozens of them, approaching from all directions. The compound was being surrounded by what looked like a small army. "Kira." Zane's voice was weak but urgent. He'd managed to shift back to human form, though the effort had clearly cost him. "There are too many. We have to run." She looked down at the man she loved, seeing the blood that stained his skin, the way he favored his left side where Raven's claws had found their mark. The wolfsbane was still in his system, making him vulnerable when he should be healing. "No more running," she said, her hybrid voice carrying notes that made the remaining pack members whimper. "I'm tired of being hunted. Tired of being afraid." The rage that had been building since the foundry, since she'd learned about her parents' murder, since she discovered the price of her bloodline, finally found its outlet. It poured through her transformed body like liquid lightning, seeking a target for its fury. The compound shuddered. It started as a low vibration in the floor, barely noticeable. But within seconds, it grew to a tremor that rattled dishes in the Kit Nakamura and sent books tumbling from shelves in the library. "Kira," Zane said urgently, struggling to his feet. "You need to control it." "Why?" She turned those burning golden eyes on him, and he stepped back involuntarily. So they can keep coming? So they can keep threatening everyone I care about? So they can poison you and cage me and think they can win? The tremor became an earthquake. Stone cracked. Steel beams groaned. The massive log supports that held up the compound's main structure began to splinter under stresses they were never designed to handle. Outside, she could hear shouts of alarm as Cassius's strike force found the ground shifting beneath their feet. Trees swayed without wind, and rocks tumbled down the mountainside in small avalanches. This is what they wanted, Kira said, her voice now audible throughout the entire compound despite speaking at normal volume. They wanted to see what a shadow moon could do when pushed to her limits. Let them see. The power radiating from her hybrid form wasn't just affecting the building anymore. It was affecting reality itself on a fundamental level. The air shimmered with energy that made electronics spark and fail. Metal objects began to resonate with harmonic frequencies that shouldn't exist. And through it all, the wolves, both friendly and hostile, found themselves compelled to submit to a presence that their deepest instincts recognized as the apex predator they were never meant to challenge. The whole mountain, Zane breathed, his eyes wide with awe and terror. You're going to bring down the whole mountain. Kira's smile in her hybrid form was a terrifying thing. Too many teeth, too sharp, too knowing. Just the parts one don't like. The north wall of the compound, the direction Cassius was approaching from, exploded outward in a shower of stone and timber. The force of the destruction sent shockwaves through the forest that toppled century-old pines and created a crater where the approach road used to be. Through the gap in the wall, she could see Cassius's strike force, 30 wolves in various stages of transformation, all pressed flat against the ground as primal terror overrode their training. Cassius himself stood at the center of the group, his pale face twisted with a mixture of hunger and fear. Even he, ancient and powerful as he was, found himself fighting the urge to bare his throat in submission. Magnificent, he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the devastation. Even more powerful than your parents were. Do you know what I could accomplish with you at my side? Kira stepped through the ruined wall, her hybrid form moving with fluid grace despite its size. Each footstep left cracks in the stone beneath her feet. I know what my parents could have accomplished if you hadn't murdered them, she replied, her voice now carrying notes that made the very air vibrate. They were weak. They chose to hide, to live as humans, to waste their gifts. Cassius spread his arms wide, seemingly oblivious to the destruction around him. I offered them the chance to rule. To take their rightful place as the dominant force in our world. And when they refused, I eliminated the threat they represented. His pale eyes glittered with fanatic fervor. But you're different. You've tasted power now. You know what it feels like to be truly strong. Kira looked around at the devastation she'd caused, the ruined compound, the terrified wolves, the forest that looked like it had been hit by a natural disaster. The rational part of her mind was horrified by the destruction, but the wolf in her felt only satisfaction. You're right, she said quietly. I do know what power feels like. Cassius's smile widened triumphantly. And I know that you'll never have it. She moved faster than thought, crossing the distance between them before his expression could change from triumph to alarm. Her clawed hand closed around his throat, lifting him off the ground as easily as she'd lifted his subordinates. This is for my parents, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every wolf present. Cassius clawed frantically at her grip, his own supernatural strength useless against her hybrid form. His pale eyes widened as he realized that all his planning, all his cunning, all his accumulated power meant nothing against what she'd become. But instead of ending his life quickly, Kira paused. Around them, 30 wolves watched in terrified silence. Behind her, Zane struggled to his feet, the wolfsbane finally beginning to work its way out of his system. The compound smoldered in ruins, and half the mountain looked like it had been rearranged by an angry god. This was the moment Victor had warned her about. The moment she chose between justice and vengeance, between protection and domination. The power flowing through her whispered seductive promises. She could kill Cassius and claim his pack. She could hunt down every alpha who'd ever threatened her family. She could reshape the supernatural world according to her will, ensuring that no one would ever again dare to challenge a shadow moon. All she had to do was squeeze a little harder. Kira. Zane's voice cut through the power-drunk haze clouding her thoughts. Come back to me. She turned to look at him, bloodied, poisoned, weakened, but still standing. Still fighting. Still choosing to see her as a woman worth loving rather than a monster to be feared. They'll keep coming, she said, her grip still tight around Cassius's throat. As long as he lives, as long as others think they can take what's mine, they'll keep coming. Yes, Zane agreed simply. They will. And you think I should let him go? I think you should choose who you want to be. Not who your power tells you to be, not who your enemies expect you to be. Who you choose to be. The rage that had been driving her began to ebb, replaced by something harder to define. Not weakness, she would never be weak again. But restraint. Control. The kind of strength that came from choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier. She looked into Cassius's pale eyes and saw the fear there. The recognition that his life hung by a thread that she could cut at any moment. If I ever see you again, she said quietly, if I ever hear that you've threatened anyone I care about, if you so much as think about hunting another shadow moon, I will find you. And next time, I won't be feeling merciful. She released him, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping and clutching his throat. Run, she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. All of you. Run, and tell every pack what happened here. Tell them that the Shadow Moon bloodline is under my protection now. Tell them that anyone who threatens my family will face me. Cassius's wolves didn't need to be told twice. They scattered into the forest like leaves before a hurricane, carrying their beaten leader with them. Kira watched them disappear into the darkness, then slowly began to shift back to human form. The transformation was gentler this time, more controlled, though she retained enough of her enhanced abilities to feel secure. When it was complete, she stood naked in the ruins of the compound, steam rising from her skin in the cool mountain air. Zane approached carefully, offering her his jacket. How do you feel? He asked. She considered the question seriously. The rage was gone, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that spoke of power used and control maintained. Around them, the surviving pack members began to emerge from hiding, their eyes wide with awe and residual fear. Different, she said finally. Like I've been holding my breath my whole life and finally learned how to breathe. Zane's arms came around her, and she leaned into his warmth. No regrets? She looked at the devastation around them, the ruined compound, the scarred mountain, the lingering scent of terror and submission. A month ago, she would have been horrified by the destruction. Now, she felt only satisfaction that the people she loved were safe. Only one, she said. What's that? She smiled up at him, and there was something wild and dangerous in the expression that would never quite be human again. That it took me so long to stop being afraid of what I am. Behind them, the compound continued to smolder in the pre-dawn darkness. But for the first time since her powers had awakened, Kira felt truly at peace. She'd found her strength. She'd chosen her path. And she'd learned that sometimes, the only way to protect what you love is to become the monster your enemies fear most. The age of hiding was over. The Shadow Moon bloodline had returned, and the supernatural world would never be the same. Chapter 7. The wolfsbane was killing him. Kira knelt beside Zane in the ruins of what had once been their bedroom, watching the poison work its way through his system like liquid death. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his breathing came in shallow, labored gasps that sent spikes of panic through her chest. How long? She asked Soren, the pack's medic, who crouched on Zane's other side with a grim expression. Hours, maybe less. Soren's hands shook as he checked Zane's pulse. This isn't ordinary wolfsbane, it's been concentrated, refined. Military grade. I've never seen anything like it. Kira's enhanced senses could smell the poison in Zane's blood, a bitter metallic scent that made her wolf recoil in revulsion. But underneath the wolfsbane, she detected something else, something that made her blood run cold. There's something else mixed with it, she said quietly. Soren's face went pale. What do you mean? Silver. Liquid silver, atomized and bonded to the wolfsbane at a molecular level. The knowledge came to her from somewhere deep in her genetic memory, inherited wisdom from ancestors who'd faced similar threats. It's not just poisoning him, it's rewriting his DNA. That's impossible. Is it? Kira's voice carried an edge that made Soren flinch. A month ago, you would have said hybrid transformations were impossible too. She touched Zane's forehead, and his skin felt like ice despite the fever burning in his eyes. When those golden orbs focused on her, she saw the knowledge there. He knew he was dying, and he was trying to be brave about it. Don't, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Don't do anything stupid to save me. Define stupid, she said, trying to keep her tone light even as terror clawed at her chest. Anything that puts you in more danger than you're already in. Kira almost laughed at that. She'd just destroyed half a mountain and sent one of the oldest alphas in existence running with his tail between his legs. What more danger could there possibly be? The answer came in the form of a sound that made every surviving pack member freeze in terror, a low, harmonic note that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of reality. It was calling, summoning, demanding. And Kira knew exactly what it meant. They're coming, she breathed. Who? Soren asked, but his question was answered before she could respond. The temperature in the ruined compound dropped 20 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. Shadows deepened despite the morning sun, and the air itself seemed to thicken with ancient power. 5 figures materialized in the main hall, not walking in through the destroyed walls, but simply appearing as if they'd always been there. They wore forms that were almost human, but something about their proportions was subtly wrong, as if they were wearing human shapes like ill-fitting clothes. The High Council had come calling. Kira had never seen them before, but her blood recognized them instantly. These were the wolves who'd ruled from the shadows since before recorded history, the puppet masters who'd shaped supernatural society according to their will. And they were terrifyingly beautiful. The one in the center stood nearly 7 feet tall, with silver hair that moved without wind and eyes like chips of Arctic ice. His presence radiated such authority that even in her grief and rage, Kira felt the urge to bare her throat in submission. Kira Nakamura, he said, and his voice carried harmonics that made the broken stones around them resonate. Last daughter of the Shadow Moon bloodline. You've caused quite a disturbance. Have I? She rose from beside Zane's prone form, placing herself between him and the council members. I was under the impression I was defending myself. Defending? The council leader's smile was sharp enough to cut. You destroyed a compound, terrorized 2 separate packs, and demonstrated abilities that haven't been seen in over a century. That goes well beyond self-defense. Maybe your definition of appropriate response is different from mine. A second council member, a woman whose beauty was so perfect it was disturbing, stepped forward. We are Thessarian, first of the council. This is Valdris, keeper of laws. She gestured to the leader, then to the others. Morvain, master of territories. Zephyra, guardian of bloodlines. And Kronos, the executioner. The title sent a chill down Kira's spine, but she kept her expression neutral. Lovely. Should I be impressed? You should be careful, Thessarian replied smoothly. We've come to offer you a choice, child. A chance to avoid the fate that befell your ancestors. My ancestors were murdered by Cassius Draven. Cassius was merely the weapon, Valdris said, his Arctic eyes never leaving her face. We were the ones who decided the Shadow Moon bloodline had become too dangerous to continue. The casual admission hit Kira like a physical blow. You ordered their deaths. We ordered the preservation of the supernatural world's stability. Morvain spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. Your bloodline represented a threat to the careful balance we've maintained for thousands of years. What threat? My parents were librarians. Your parents were the descendants of wolves who could mate with any alpha and produce offspring stronger than either parent. Zephyr's voice held a note of something that might have been respect. Children who could command the loyalty of multiple packs, who could unite the supernatural world under a single banner. That doesn't sound like a threat. That sounds like evolution. Evolution that would have upset the balance of power we've spent millennia establishing. Kronos spoke for the first time, and his voice was like the whisper of a blade across stone. Your ancestors didn't just create stronger wolves, they created a new species entirely. One that threatened to make traditional alphas obsolete. Kira felt pieces of a puzzle she'd never known existed clicking into place. That's why you had them killed. Not because they were dangerous to other packs, but because they were dangerous to you. Precisely. Valdris's smile held no warmth. The High Council exists to maintain order, to ensure that no single bloodline becomes powerful enough to challenge our authority. Your ancestors represented chaos. And now I do. Now you do, Thessarian agreed. Which brings us to why we're here. We're prepared to offer you something your ancestors never had, a choice. Kira glanced back at Zane, whose breathing had become even more labored. Whatever choice they were offering, she needed to make it quickly. What kind of choice? Join us, Valdris said simply. Accept your place as the sixth member of the High Council. Help us maintain the balance that keeps our world stable. In exchange for power beyond your wildest dreams. Immortality. The ability to shape supernatural society according to your will. Thessarian's eyes glittered with promise. You would never again have to fear for your safety or the safety of those you care about. And all I have to do is abandon my mate and become your weapon. All you have to do is choose the greater good over personal attachment, Morvain corrected. One life against the stability of an entire species. Kira looked down at Zane, seeing the way his hands had started to tremble as the poison worked deeper into his system. His golden eyes met hers, and she saw the love there, the acceptance, the willingness to die rather than see her compromise her principles. What happens if I refuse? Kronos stepped forward, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Then we eliminate the threat you represent, just as we did with your ancestors. The difference is that this time, we'll do it ourselves rather than using a proxy. You think you can? Child, Valdris said with something that might have been pity, we are the wolves who taught your ancestors how to hunt. We were ancient when they were young. Do you really think your newfound power is enough to challenge us? Kira felt the rage building in her chest again, but this time it was different. Cleaner. More focused. It wasn't the wild fury that had destroyed the compound, it was the cold, calculating anger of someone who'd been pushed too far. Let's find out, she said. The transformation began before she'd finished speaking. But this wasn't the hybrid form she'd used against Cassius. This was something deeper, older, more fundamental. Power that had been sleeping in her bloodline for generations suddenly roared to life, reshaping her not just physically but on a molecular level. She grew, but not in the way she had before. This time, she retained her essentially human appearance while becoming something far more than human. Her hair darkened to midnight black shot through with silver threads that seemed to move with their own life. Her eyes blazed with golden fire that cast actual shadows. And her presence. Her presence filled the ruined compound like a living thing, pressing against the council members with enough force to make even their ancient power waver. Impossible, Thessarian breathed. The awakening shouldn't be this complete. You killed my parents, Kira said, and her voice now carried harmonics that made the very air vibrate with power. You've spent centuries manipulating and controlling our species like we're your personal chess pieces. You poisoned my mate and then had the audacity to offer me a place at your table. She took a step toward them, and cracks appeared in the stone floor beneath her feet. Did you really think I'd choose you over him? The battle erupted with a violence that made her previous displays of power look like gentle breezes. Valdris struck first, moving with speed that blurred reality itself. But Kira was faster. She caught his arm mid-swing and used his own momentum to send him crashing through what remained of the compound's eastern wall. Thessarian and Morvain attacked from opposite sides, their combined assault coordinated with the precision of centuries of practice. Kira spun between them like a dancer, her movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Her backhand caught Thessarian across the face with enough force to send the ancient wolf spinning, while her knee found Morvain's solar plexus and doubled him over. Zephyra tried to bind her with what looked like silver chains that materialized from thin air, but the metal simply dissolved when it touched Kira's skin. The power flowing through her was beyond anything the council had prepared for. "She's evolved," Kronos snarled, drawing a blade that seemed to be made of crystallized shadow. "The bloodline has reached its final form." He lunged at her with the skill of someone who'd been killing for millennia, but Kira caught the blade between her palms and shattered it like glass. Her return strike sent him flying backward to crash into the remains of a support beam. "You're right," she said, advancing on the fallen council members. "I have evolved. But not into what you expected." Valdris struggled to his feet, his perfect features now marked with blood and fury. "You think this changes anything? There are others like us, scattered across the globe. Kill us, and you'll only prove that your bloodline is too dangerous to exist." "Maybe," Kira agreed. "But at least I'll have proved that your time is over." She raised her hand, power crackling around her fingers like captured lightning. One gesture, and the High Council, rulers of the supernatural world for millennia, would cease to exist. But then she heard it, a soft, pained whisper from behind her. "Kira." Zane. Calling her name with what might be his last breath. She turned to see him struggling to sit up, his face gray with approaching death but his eyes still burning with love and determination. "Don't become them," he whispered. "Don't let the power make you into what they are." The rage that had been driving her suddenly crystallized into something else entirely, not the need for vengeance, but the need to protect. Not the desire to dominate, but the desire to heal. She looked back at the council members, seeing them not as ancient tyrants but as wolves who'd let fear and the need for control consume their humanity. They'd become exactly what they'd accused her bloodline of being, a threat to the balance they claimed to protect. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "The old order is ending. But I'm not going to end it through violence." She knelt beside Zane and placed her hands on his chest, letting the power that had been crackling with destructive force flow into healing instead. The energy poured out of her like warm honey, seeking and neutralizing the poison in his bloodstream. The wolfsbane silver compound that should have been impossible to counteract simply dissolved under the touch of power that predated its creation by millennia. Within moments, color began returning to Zane's face, and his breathing deepened. "How?" Thessarian demanded. Shadow Moon power was never oriented toward healing. "Because you never understood what Shadow Moon power really was," Kira replied without looking up from Zane. "You thought it was about dominance, about control. But it was never about ruling others." She helped Zane sit up, steadying him as strength flowed back into his limbs. "It was about connection. About bringing out the best in others instead of forcing them into submission." She finally turned back to face the council. "My ancestors weren't trying to create super soldiers. They were trying to create a family." "Pretty words," Valdris snarled. "But power is power. You can't change what you are." "You're right. I can't change what I am." Kira rose to her feet, and the power radiating from her shifted yet again, not destructive, not commanding, but simply present. Like sunlight or gravity or any other fundamental force of nature. "I'm the daughter of wolves who chose love over fear, connection over control. I'm someone who'd rather heal her mate than rule a species." She looked at each council member in turn, seeing the fear and confusion in their ancient eyes. "But I'm also someone who won't let threats to my family go unanswered. So here's my counteroffer: leave. Now. Spread the word that the old ways are ending, and anyone who wants to continue them can find me if they think they're strong enough." "You can't just dismiss us," Morvain protested. "We are the High Council." "You were the High Council," Kira corrected. "Now you're 5 very old wolves who just learned that there are things in this world more powerful than fear." The silence stretched between them, thick with tension and possibility. Finally, Valdris spoke. "This isn't over." "No," Kira agreed. "It's just beginning. But it's beginning on my terms now, not yours." One by one, the council members began to fade, their forms dissolving back into shadow and mist. But just before Thessarian disappeared entirely, she spoke one last time. You think you've won, but you've only painted a target on your back. Every ambitious alpha, every power-hungry pack, every wolf who dreams of conquest will come for you now. You'll spend the rest of your life fighting. Kira's smile was sharp and beautiful and utterly fearless. Let them come. I'll be ready. When the last of the council members had vanished, Kira sank down beside Zane, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. The power that had sustained her through the confrontation was still there, but using it had taken more out of her than she'd expected. Are you all right? Zane asked, his voice stronger now but still concerned. I will be. She leaned into his warmth, drawing comfort from his solid presence. How do you feel? Like I've been poisoned and healed by forces beyond my comprehension, he said dryly. So, you know, Tuesday. Despite everything, Kira laughed. Trust Zane to find humor in the aftermath of supernatural warfare. What happens now? He asked more seriously. Kira looked around at the ruins of the compound, at the scattered pack members who were slowly emerging from hiding, at the mountain scarred by her display of power. She thought about Thessarian's warning, about the ambitious alphas and power-hungry packs who would undoubtedly come seeking to claim or eliminate the last shadow moon. Now we rebuild, she said finally. But not the way things were. Something new. Something better. And if they come for us? Kira's eyes blazed with golden fire that held no fear, only determination. Then they'll learn why the Shadow Moon bloodline was worth preserving. As the sun climbed higher over the scarred mountain, Kira Nakamura sat among the ruins of the old world and began planning the new one. She was the most powerful werewolf alive, the most hunted creature in the supernatural world. And for the first time in her life, she was exactly who she was meant to be. Chapter 8. 6 months had changed everything. Kira stood on the balcony of the rebuilt compound, watching the blood moon rise over the mountains like a crimson eye opening in the darkness. The sight should have been beautiful, the rare celestial event that occurred only once every few years, when the moon turned the color of spilled wine and supernatural power flowed like electricity through the air. Instead, it filled her with dread. Because tonight, the blood moon wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a declaration of war. They're moving, Zane said behind her, his voice carrying the tension that had been building for weeks. Soren just reported movement on all fronts. 3 vampire covens approaching from the east, 2 witch circles from the south, and Cassius's expanded pack from the north. Kira didn't turn around. Her enhanced senses could already detect them, hundreds of supernatural creatures converging on their territory like a tide of darkness. The scents were a nauseating mixture of old blood, ancient magic, and something else. Something that made her wolf recoil in disgust. He's using blood magic, she said quietly. What? Cassius. He's binding them together with blood magic, vampires, witches, and wolves who should be natural enemies, all united by spells that override their basic instincts. She finally turned to face her mate, seeing her own fears reflected in his golden eyes. That's why they're willing to work together. They don't have a choice. Zane moved to stand beside her, his warmth a comfort against the chill night air. In the 6 months since the confrontation with the High Council, he'd changed too. The experience of nearly dying had stripped away some of his arrogance, leaving behind a leader who ruled through wisdom rather than dominance. How many? She asked. 300, maybe more. And that's just the ones we can detect. His jaw clenched. He's been busy. Kira nodded grimly. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building like a storm on the horizon ever since word of the High Council's defeat had spread through the supernatural world. Some packs had sought alliance with them, drawn by the promise of a new order built on cooperation rather than fear. But others had seen only opportunity, believing that the last shadow moon could be captured, controlled, or eliminated. Cassius Draven had proven to be the most persistent of her enemies. Kira. A new voice joined them on the balcony, and she turned to see her sister approaching. But this wasn't the fragile human who'd been kidnapped 6 months ago. This was Yuki, because that's who she'd chosen to become after learning the truth about their world. The transformation had been her choice. After witnessing the supernatural battle that had nearly claimed her life, Yuki had demanded to know everything. And when she'd learned about their family's true heritage, about the dormant wolf genes that flowed in her veins too, she'd made a decision that had shocked everyone. She'd asked Zane to awaken her wolf. It had been a risk. Dormant bloodlines didn't always respond to the awakening bite, and failure could mean death or madness. But Yuki had been determined to stand beside her sister rather than hide behind her protection. The transformation had been successful, though different from Kira's dramatic awakening. Yuki's wolf was smaller, more subtle, but her enhanced senses and reflexes had made her a formidable fighter. More importantly, her strategic mind had helped them prepare for the war they all knew was coming. The evacuations are complete, Yuki reported. All non-combatants have been moved to the secondary shelters. Our allies are in position, and the defensive perimeter is holding for now. And Ezra? Kira asked about her brother-in-law. Safe in the deep bunker with the other humans. Yuki's expression softened slightly. He wanted to fight, but he's more valuable alive than dead. Kira's tone was matter-of-fact rather than cruel. They'd all learned to make hard choices in the months since her awakening. The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of their war council, Soren, Nyx, and half a dozen other wolves who'd proven themselves in the skirmishes that had been building toward this moment. Their faces were grim but determined. Final count, Soren reported without preamble. 347 hostiles. 57 vampires, 43 witches, and the rest are wolves from various packs that Cassius has either conquered or coerced. Our numbers? Zane asked. 87, including the allied packs that answered our call. The odds were stark, more than 4 to 1 against them. But Kira had learned that raw numbers weren't everything in supernatural warfare. What about the venue? She asked. Nyx stepped forward, his expression troubled. That's unusual. Intelligence suggests they're planning to make their final push at the Grand Palladium Hotel. Kira's blood ran cold. The Grand Palladium, the same hotel where Yuki's wedding had taken place, where she'd first met Zane, where this entire journey had begun. He's making a statement, she realized. Starting and ending it in the same place. There's more, Soren added reluctantly. They've taken hostages. Wedding guests who were staying at the hotel for some corporate event. Cassius is using them as human shields. The cruelty of it hit Kira like a physical blow. Innocent people caught in a war they couldn't understand, used as pawns in a game of supernatural politics. How many? Zane's voice was dangerously quiet. 43 confirmed. Nyx consulted his tablet. Including, he hesitated. Including who? Kira demanded. Including Javier Cortez and Peyton Mills. Her ex-boyfriend and his girlfriend. The people whose smug superiority had started this entire chain of events by making her feel small and unwanted at her sister's wedding. For a moment, Kira felt a surge of dark satisfaction. Then she remembered who she'd chosen to become. Not the monster her enemies expected, but the leader her people needed. We get them out, she said firmly. All of them. Kira, Zane said carefully, the tactical situation. We get them out, she repeated, her voice carrying the authority that had been growing stronger with each passing month. We don't sacrifice innocence to win battles. That's what separates us from Cassius. The War Council exchanged glances, but none of them argued. They'd learned to trust their alpha's judgment, even when it made their jobs harder. The blood moon reaches full intensity in 2 hours, Yuki observed, checking her watch. If we're going to move, it has to be soon. Kira nodded. The blood moon wasn't just symbolic, it actually did amplify supernatural abilities, particularly hers. During the last blood moon, she'd accidentally shattered every window in a 3-block radius just by losing her temper. Tonight, that power might be the only thing standing between her pack and annihilation. Battle formations, she ordered. Strike teams Alpha through Delta take positions around the hotel's perimeter. Soren, take your team through the service tunnels. We need to secure the hostages before the main assault begins. What about you? Zane asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I'm going through the front door. Kira's smile was sharp and fearless. Time to finish what Cassius started. The Grand Palladium Hotel was burning. Not literally, not yet, but the supernatural energies crackling through the air were so intense that metal fixtures sparked and light bulbs exploded in showers of glass. The elegant lobby where Kira had once felt out of place now looked like a war zone, with furniture overturned to create barricades and scorch marks decorating the marble walls. Cassius stood in the center of it all like a pale spider in his web, surrounded by his supernatural army. He'd changed in the months since their last confrontation. His platinum hair was longer, his pale skin marked with ritual scars that spoke of dark magic, and his eyes held a madness that made Kira's wolf recoil. Welcome, he called out as she entered through the shattered main doors, Zane and Yuki flanking her like loyal guardians. Welcome to the place where it all began. How delightfully poetic. Let the hostages go, Kira said without preamble. This is between us. Oh, but they're such lovely decorations. Cassius gestured to the terrified humans huddled against the far wall, guarded by vampires whose fangs gleamed in the flickering light. And they provide such excellent motivation for you to cooperate. Kira's enhanced hearing picked up the rapid heartbeats of the hostages, the quiet sobs of fear, the whispered prayers of people who knew they were caught in something beyond their understanding. Among them, she spotted Javier and Peyton, both looking much less smug than she remembered. What do you want? She asked. What I've always wanted. Cassius began to circle her like a predator, his supernatural army moving with him in a coordinated dance of menace. Your power. Your bloodline. Your submission. You tried that before. It didn't work out well for you. But that was before I understood the true scope of what you represent. His pale eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. Do you know what you did when you defeated the High Council? You didn't just eliminate 5 ancient wolves, you shattered the fundamental power structure that has governed our world for millennia. Kira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What do you mean? Every supernatural creature on Earth felt it when they died. Every vampire, every witch, every werewolf suddenly found themselves free of constraints that had bound them for thousands of years. Cassius's smile was sharp with triumph. You created chaos, little wolf. And chaos creates opportunity. Around the lobby, his army began to shift into more aggressive positions. Vampires bared their fangs, witches raised their hands to begin casting spells, and wolves dropped into crouches that spoke of imminent attack. So I decided to impose a new order, Cassius continued. One with me at the top and you as my pet weapon. Together, we'll reshape the supernatural world according to my vision. And if I refuse? Then everyone you care about dies. Starting with these lovely humans and ending with your precious mate. His gaze shifted to Zane, and the hunger there was unmistakable. I'll make you watch as I tear his throat out, then I'll bind your will with blood magic until you have no choice but to serve. The threat hit Kira like a physical blow, and she felt the power within her respond to her rage. The blood moon's influence was reaching its peak, and every supernatural ability she possessed was amplified to an almost unbearable degree. Last chance, Cassius said softly. Submit, or watch them all burn. Kira looked around the lobby, at the terrified hostages, at Cassius's supernatural army, at Yuki and Zane who would fight beside her to the death if she asked them to. The smart tactical choice would be to surrender, to buy time until their allies could mount a rescue. But she'd learned that sometimes the right choice wasn't the smart choice. No, she said simply. The battle erupted with a violence that made her previous displays of power look like gentle exercises. Cassius's army attacked from all sides, moving with the coordination of a force bound by blood magic. Vampires flowed like liquid shadow, witches hurled spells that crackled with eldritch fire, and wolves bounded forward with fangs bared and claws extended. But Kira was ready for them. The power of the blood moon flowed through her like molten gold, reshaping her on a fundamental level. She didn't transform into her hybrid form. Instead, she became something new, something that had never existed before. She moved like lightning given form, appearing beside one vampire and reducing it to ash with a touch, then materializing across the lobby to catch a spell in mid-flight and hurl it back at its caster. Her very presence seemed to warp reality around her, making the impossible suddenly mundane. Beside her, Zane and Yuki fought with the coordinated precision of pack mates who'd trained together for months. Zane's alpha strength was amplified by his bond with Kira, while Yuki's smaller wolf form darted between enemies like a silver ghost, striking at vulnerable points before melting back into the shadows. But for every enemy they felled, two more seemed to take their place. The lobby became a charnel house of supernatural violence, with marble cracking under the force of impacts and ancient magic leaving scorch marks on everything it touched. Enough! Cassius roared, raising his hands to weave a spell that made the air itself thicken with malevolent power. If you won't submit willingly, I'll break you. The magic he unleashed was unlike anything Kira had ever faced, not just a weapon, but a fundamental rewriting of reality itself. She felt it trying to sink hooks into her mind, to override her will and reshape her into something that would serve his purposes. For a moment, she wavered. The spell was incredibly powerful, backed by decades of preparation and the combined will of his supernatural army. Then she heard Zane cry out in pain as one of the vampires managed to rake claws across his ribs, and her resolve crystallized into something unbreakable. "You want to see what I'm really capable of?" she asked, her voice carrying harmonics that made the hotel's steel framework groan. "Let me show you." She reached deep into the well of power that was her birthright, not just the strength she'd awakened over the past months, but the accumulated potential of generations of Shadow Moon wolves who'd never had the chance to fully manifest their abilities. The power that flowed out of her was like nothing she'd ever experienced. It wasn't destructive, like her rage-fueled displays at the compound. It was creative, transformative, healing in its purest form. Every werewolf in the lobby, friend and foe alike, suddenly found themselves connected to her on a level that transcended pack loyalty or blood magic compulsion. She could feel their minds, their hearts, their deepest fears and greatest hopes. And in that moment of perfect connection, she made a choice that would change everything. Instead of using her power to destroy Cassius's army, she used it to free them. The blood magic binding the various supernatural creatures to Cassius's will simply dissolved under the touch of something purer and older. Vampires stumbled as their artificial compulsions fell away, witches gasped as foreign spells were torn from their minds, and wolves howled in confused relief as their true natures reasserted themselves. "What did you do?" Cassius demanded, his pale face twisted with fury and panic. "I gave them back their choice," Kira replied, though the effort of channeling so much power was already taking its toll. She could feel something fundamental burning out inside her, like a candle flame reaching the end of its wick. Around the lobby, the supernatural creatures who'd been Cassius's army began to flee. Freed from the blood magic that had bound them, most wanted nothing more than to escape the madness they'd been forced to participate in. But not all of them left. A handful of vampires and wolves remained, their eyes blazing with a fury that was entirely their own. These weren't victims of Cassius's magic, they were true believers who'd chosen to follow him willingly. "Kill them all," Cassius snarled, his composure finally cracking. "Kill them all." The remaining enemies attacked with the desperate savagery of creatures who knew they were losing. But they were too few now, and Kira's allies were arriving through the shattered windows and broken doors, pack members who'd broken through the outer defenses and come to reinforce their alpha. The battle should have been over. But Cassius had one final gambit. As his remaining forces fell around him, the pale wolf pulled out a device that made Kira's blood run cold, a modified silver grenade filled with concentrated wolfsbane, designed to kill every werewolf in a 3-block radius. "If I can't have you," he said with the calm madness of the truly desperate, "then no one can." He pulled the pin. Kira had perhaps 3 seconds before the device exploded, spreading deadly poison through the air in a cloud that would kill everyone she cared about. 3 seconds to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could use her remaining power to shield her pack, but doing so would burn out her abilities completely and permanently. She would survive, but she would be human, no enhanced senses, no supernatural strength, no connection to the wolf that had become such a fundamental part of her identity. Or she could save her power and watch everyone she loved die. It wasn't really a choice at all. Kira threw herself over the grenade and wrapped her arms around it, using her body and her power to contain the explosion. The wolfsbane silver mixture that should have killed dozens instead found itself trapped within a sphere of energy that held it like a prison. The effort tore through her like liquid fire, burning away everything supernatural in her system. She felt her enhanced senses fade, her connection to the pack dissolve, her wolf form locked away behind barriers that would never come down. But her family was safe. Her pack was safe. Zane was safe. As consciousness faded, she felt strong arms catch her before she could hit the marble floor. Kira, Zane's voice seemed to come from very far away. Stay with me. Did we win? She whispered. We won. You won. She could hear tears in his voice. But what did you do? I can't. I can't feel you anymore. I chose love over power, she said, echoing the decision she'd made so many times before. Again. Then darkness claimed her, and she dreamed of running through forests on 2 legs instead of 4, but running towards something beautiful rather than away from something terrible. Epilogue 1 year later. The new Nakamura's Corner Books was exactly what Kira had always imagined her father's shop could become. Bright and welcoming, with comfortable reading nooks scattered throughout and the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the small cafe area Zane had insisted they include. Children's laughter echoed from the storytime corner, where Yuki was reading to a group of fascinated toddlers who had no idea their reader could once transform into a wolf. Kira stood behind the counter, one hand resting on her rounded belly, watching her sister animate the tale of 3 little pigs with theatrical flair. At 7 months pregnant with twins, she moved more slowly than she once had, but there was a contentment in her movements that hadn't been there during her supernatural phase. How are you feeling? Zane asked, appearing beside her with 2 cups of herbal tea, decaffeinated, because he'd become ridiculously protective during her pregnancy. Fat, tired, and happy, she replied honestly, accepting the warm mug with a grateful smile. It had taken months to adjust to being fully human again. The loss of her enhanced senses had been particularly difficult, like losing a 6th sense she'd grown to depend on. But gradually, she'd learned to appreciate the quiet simplicity of human perception, the way ordinary experiences could be profound when you weren't constantly aware of the supernatural world lurking beneath the surface. The bookshop had been Zane's idea. He'd insisted that her father's dream deserved to be realized properly, with enough funding to stock the shelves with rare books and comfortable furniture, enough space for community events and children's programs. Any regrets? He asked, as he did sometimes when he caught her looking thoughtful. Only one, she said, turning to face the man she'd chosen over power, over supernatural strength, over everything the world had tried to convince her she should want. What's that? That it took me so long to realize that the most powerful thing in the world isn't magic or supernatural abilities. She stood on her toes to kiss him, tasting contentment and love and the promise of a future built on choice rather than destiny. It's choosing to love someone completely, no matter what it costs you. Zane's arms came around her, careful of her pregnancy but still strong and warm and protective. He'd lost his supernatural mate bond when her wolf had burned out, but their human connection had only grown stronger. No second thoughts about giving up the power? He asked. You could have ruled the supernatural world. I still am ruling it, she replied with a smile. Just not the way anyone expected. It was true. In the year since the Blood Moon battle, their example had spread through the supernatural community like ripples in a pond. Packs that had once ruled through fear were experimenting with cooperation. The rigid hierarchies that had defined werewolf society for millennia were giving way to more flexible arrangements based on mutual respect rather than dominance. It wasn't perfect. Change never was. But it was better. And it had started with 2 people choosing love over power, connection over control. The bell above the shop door chimed, and Kira looked up to see a familiar face entering. Javier, her ex-boyfriend, looking considerably more humble than she remembered. The supernatural battle at the hotel had changed him too, though in less dramatic ways. Kira, he said, approaching the counter with obvious nervousness. I wanted to. I mean, Peyton and I have been meaning to. Thank you, she said simply, saving him from his stammering. For risking your life to help the other hostages during the battle. His face flushed. I should be thanking you. You saved all of us, and I never. I mean, at the wedding I was such an ass. You were, she agreed cheerfully. But people change. I should know. He laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Peyton wanted me to invite you to our engagement party next month. She said after everything that happened, she wanted to start over. Be the kind of people who deserve friends like you. Kira felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with supernatural power and everything to do with the simple human satisfaction of forgiveness offered and accepted. We'd love to come, she said. After Javier left, clutching a book on rebuilding relationships that Yuki had recommended, Kira found herself thinking about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she'd been the most powerful werewolf alive, capable of reshaping reality with a thought. Now she was a pregnant bookshop owner whose greatest supernatural ability was knowing when the coffee was ready. And she'd never been happier. Kira. Zane's voice carried a note of concern that made her look up sharply. He was standing by the window, his body tense in a way that spoke of old instincts still functioning despite the loss of his supernatural abilities. Following his gaze, she saw what had caught his attention. A pale figure standing across the street, watching the bookshop with eyes like chips of ice. Cassius Draven. Older, scarred, clearly diminished from his defeat, but alive and free and planning something that made Kira's human heart race with sudden fear. Their eyes met across the distance, and his lips curved in a smile that held no warmth, only promise. Promise of future conflict, of old grudges not forgotten, of a hunt that would never truly end. Then he melted back into the crowd, vanishing as quickly as he'd appeared. Should we? Zane started. No, Kira said firmly, placing a protective hand over her belly where the twins, the next generation of the legendary bloodline, grew strong and healthy. Not today. Today we have a story time to finish and a life to live. But as she turned back to watch Yuki enchant her young audience with tales of adventure and transformation, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that this was just an intermission rather than an ending. The supernatural world had changed, but it hadn't been tamed. There would always be those who sought power over others, who believed that strength gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. And somewhere in the future, maybe years, maybe decades, her children would have to face that darkness and make their own choices about what kind of people they wanted to become. But that was a story for another day. For now, there was sunlight streaming through clean windows, the sound of children's laughter, and the warm weight of Zane's hand in hers. There was a business to run, a family to build, and a community to serve. There was love, chosen freely and given completely. And in the end, that was the most powerful magic of all. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share and subscribe for more.